This video is brought to you by volunteeraudio.com, your #1 source for all things Harley Davidson audio. From individual radios, speakers, and amps to complete plug-and-play amp and speaker systems, we've got you covered. And once you've ordered your package from Volunteer Audio, it includes lifetime tech support. And we have the very best step-by-step installation video so you can install it yourself and save money. All right, so continuing on with disassembly, we're going to remove the cover over the factory harnessing that runs on what we call the backbone under the gas tank. We're just going to cut a couple of these zip ties. Also, you may see that you have some of this tape. Sometimes it's not already cut. If it's not, you're going to need to cut it. Removing that tape. Now we're going to have these little clips. We're just going to undo the sides. A lot of times you can just wiggle it back and forth. It's going to come loose as you go. Undo your ABS brake lines if you have ABS. Make sure those go back in the same place later on because we don't want our gas tank to actually pinch or damage any of that. Now that we have that undone, that's where we're going to run our power and ground wiring. That's the correct place to do it. We're going to run it where Harley ran their wiring, and then at the end we'll put this back on before we put our gas tank on. All right, so we're going to continue on with this assembly now of the battery cover. So we're going to take our ECM, we're just going to unsnap it, kind of set it over to the side. This is our antenna for our key fobs, so we're going to set it over as well and disconnect both of these little connectors that went to our gas tank. Also, this is the EVAP connector. If you don't have California emissions, it's just plugged into a block off, so we're going to unplug it and put it to the side also. Now, two 13 millimeters at the back of the battery here are going to remove this cover and give us access to hooking up our power and ground wire. All right, so actually to remove this, it's very simple. We're just going to slide this to the front and then lift up. The reason we're sliding to the front is we have this little metal tab that this plastic ear was lapped over. So we're just pushing forward to release it. We're lifting it up. Now we have access to our battery. The red side, or this side here with the big positive logo, is going to be where our fused wire goes, and the other side is going to be ground where our black negative wire is going to attach. All right, so on this particular bike, we also have this little shield here to deter or to send air in a different direction. It's a deflector. We're gonna just unsnap it and get it out of our way. That's gonna give us the ability to show you where we're running our power wire, but also get our hands in there better. If you have this, take it off, just snap it back on later. It's very easy. So Robbie just pried out and slid backwards this cover. The reason we went ahead and pulled it off, I want to show you, is there's a little plastic tab at the top. It does take some force, but you can just push this backwards enough that it unlaps. That's going to let it fold out enough to run our wiring in. You don't actually have to unbolt it from the bottom if you'll do it in this method. And then at the end, we just want to do the same thing. Slide it back, clip it back in, and make sure that it's back in place once we're done. So we did that so we could run new power and ground wire up to the front. So we're going to do that. We're going to fish it up here through here. So we're going to take our connector. We're going to straighten our steering up enough that we can get through here to where we can pull that plastic out. And you're going to feed it through, right up through this hole. Once you've got it in there, you're going to move to the other side, up under the radio. You're going to grab that wiring and pull it forward. Just going to pull a couple of feet of this out. Pulling it up here, we're going to go through this hole underneath our radio. It's going to get our wiring pulled up here where we need it, so later we can hook it up to our amp. Any excess wiring will be tucked up here when we're finished. Right, we're going to take that same plastic piece that we just talked about. We're going to slide that clip back enough that it goes in while pressing, and now it's back where it's supposed to go. We're also going to zip tie it to this factory wiring going into this backbone. All right, so we're going to go ahead and put the cover back on. So we don't need access in here for those lower speaker wires. I normally just try to go over here to the side of all these wires, making sure that I'm in that same area. This being a CVO, it's got every option, so it's got a lot more wiring than normal. It's going to be tight, but we can make this all fit in there. Starting at the front, we're just going to make sure we get lapped over both sides. Get a few of our clips clipped in. Working our way to the back. Making sure none of the factory wires are hanging out. So we've got everything clipped back into place. Now we're going to make sure our ABS lines go back where they go. Just want to make sure they're tucked in here to the side, as well as pushed back in here to the clips that hold it on the side so that our gas tank will go on without actually hurting any of those. Now we're going to leave our gas tank off at the moment because we're going to be working on the lowers. It's going to make it a lot easier. If you weren't doing lowers, you could go ahead and put your gas tank back on at this time. But I'm going to move on and go and connect our power up at our battery. It's feeding our power and ground wire here underneath this particular wiring. And this is as simple as just a Phillips screwdriver. Now CVOs have an alarm. Sometimes they're going to go off when you disconnect your battery. So we're going to try to keep everything connected so we don't have to hear it go off. Most of the time, the threaded part of your battery is actually made into this post. This one has an actual nut underneath. I have to try to lift up to get it to grab. Do the same thing on the other post. All right, so we're going to take this fuse holder. We're going to tuck it here in front of the battery. Make sure we put it where it does not come out into the engine compartment though. Most of these have a pretty sealed up area, but a little bit, the 15s, 16s, 17s, before they went to the M8, so I guess 15 and 16, there's an area here you can put it, but you just want to make sure you don't put it where it's going to come out into the engine compartment. Just tucking all that wiring here in front so it's not visible after we get our battery cover back on. All right, sliding underneath that tab, bring it to the back. I'll put our 13s back in. All right, so now I'm going to plug up that evap connector back in where it goes. Drop our ECM and snap it in. That's our heated seat plug. Make sure we put our antenna back in place for our key fobs. We want to leave it up here where it picks up better. And then our black and gray connectors, which actually are labeled here to make sure you put them back in the correct place. All right, so now we're ready to move forward. Later on, we'll put our seat on, but we're not going to do that until we get the gas tank on and we get our wiring for our lowers done. We're going to move back up to the front. We're going to go ahead and put our amp in place next. All right, so your new Hertz amplifier is mounted on a bracket like the factory. Now, this is a very tight fit. You're going to have these little ears, and if you let it drop down, it's going to get tighter because all this is beveled. So it's angled, so it's going to be harder if you let it fall. So you're going to hold it up. You're going to slide it back in this hole. All right, so I got it slid all the way in place. It is a very tight fit. Sometimes you have to wiggle some, sometimes it's harder than others. Now we're going to line up all 4 of our outside holes and get our bolts started. Went just a little too far there. Start all 4 of these by hand. They're at like a 45, or not a 45, like a 10, 20 degree angle to start straight. We got one started. We'll get the other one started now. These are an 11 millimeter or a 7/16 when you go back together tightening them, where the originals were a 3/8. So while those speaker pods are out, you got a lot better access to these. This particular U-range still has those vents, which most of the time these vents did not open and close properly, so later they were deleted. Most of these are just solid without the air vents. There's no mechanism in your way. All right, so now Robbie's got all 4 of our screws in place. Now something I normally like to do is go ahead and drop my radio in, because these are slotted. You can move them a little forward, a little backwards. The key is we want the amp as much to the back as we can get it, and make sure we have room here to clear our radio face. It's going to clear and fit good. That's all right. So after testing that, we're going to go ahead and tighten these bolts. All right, so let me go over a couple of the connectors here on our plug-and-play harnessing so you know what we've got. This was the connector that plugged into that factory boom amplifier. And you'll notice we actually have one here that says amplifier bypass. Sometimes it'll say front amp on it, depending on the one we're using. And it's wired in to feed our rear speakers already. So when we plug this in, our amplifier is now connected to the rear speakers that are in the tour pack. We're also going to be connected to our front speakers the same way because it's going to be actually jumping the front signal through. So as simple as plugging that in, just connected all of our speakers with the exception of hooking up to our radio harnessing. Now we're going to have an additional harness on here, an extra one. This is a rear speaker, what we call a backbone connector. So if you were going to run, say, lid speakers to this bike, you would want to run a backbone from here under the seat, and then you'd hook up a lid disconnect harness to do that. So we always add this because it's not in the fairing because this one had factory rear speakers, but it didn't have a factory rear speaker connector. So now you have it if you want to do more. Now our amp harness is going to actually plug in to the factory harness that used to go to the radio. So there we are connected, feeding all the wiring, all the speaker wires throughout the bike. The other one would normally plug into your radio. So if you're using a stock radio, this is going to plug straight into it. In this case, we're doing a Soundstream radio. It's going to have its own harness, so we're going to plug into that. We'll show you some wire management here at the end on where and how we tuck all these wires, because there's a good cavity here. There's quite a bit of room under here behind the headlight and another one over here that's going to allow us to actually secure and zip tie this wiring up where it's out of the way. So if we did something like replace a headlight or did additional work, we don't have a whole lot that we have to go through or fight to get that done. So next, we're going to move on to setting our radio in. We're going to bolt it in so we can get the other harnessing plugged into it. We're also going to run some wiring from here down to our lowers on this particular install, and then we'll move into the speaker pod videos and so on and show you how to do that. All right, we are going to take our power wire that we ran up and simply plug it into our amplifier. All right, so this bracket was off of our original radio, just two T25 Torx. We took it off, bolted it right on our new radio. Robbie is also installing our bolts in with those little bushings. Now the radio is going to come with 4 new ones. Sometimes you just take them out of the original radio, but either way, you want to put the little rubber bushings on these bolts as you go together also. Radio is going to drop in the hole. It's going to fit exactly like the factory radio, mounted in the exact same holes, giving us the exact same gap and look all the way around our fairing. All right, Robbie's starting all 4 of our 3/16 Allen head bolts. Once he gets them all started, he'll start tightening them down. These Soundstream radios look so good installed. They've got that gloss black trim ring on them, which makes them really look good, whether it's a painted fairing, a flat fairing, or like the painted fairing on the specials that are just gloss black. It just looks so good. That screen just blends into it so well. And it bolts in like factory, so it's a very, very easy exchange. So things like our factory USB are just going to plug into the factory, right into the connection here. We're also going to use our factory antenna. That antenna is going to also plug directly in, all using factory parts, making this very, very simple to do. Now our actual amplifier is feeding a high-level signal, and that high-level signal is being fed all through that plug-and-play harness. So we're not going to be using any of these RCA connectors. If you did opt to add Sirius XM, there's a black plug here that you're going to pull out, and your Sirius XM tuner is going to plug in there. Now we also have another really awesome new thing out called HD Vision. It's a new camera system that any of these radios that have a backup camera input, there's a receiver we'll plug in here and wire into our power wire for that and give us a backup camera at the back of the bike. It's completely wireless. It's going to replace one of your taillights. Very, very cool system that can be added on to any of the Soundstream radios that have that camera input as well. All right, so this is our harness that came with our new Soundstream radio. We're going to make sure it plugs in at the radio. We don't want to put anything between this and the radio. So it's going to plug in just like factory. It's that same factory connector. We're going to push it in. We're going to rotate this lever, which is going to make it lock in or latch in. This is our iDataLink Maestro module. In this case, we're using the MRR2. There's two different ones, the MRR or the MRR2. This particular one, being as it is the MRR2, has built-in Bluetooth, which means if you ever need to update this or make any changes to it, you can do it from your phone, from a phone app via Bluetooth without getting back into the fairing. So that may change a little bit about where you're going to mount it, but I would always tell you there's enough lead here. Always mount it up higher where the wiring is going away from it. So if any water gets into the fairing, it's going to come down these wires instead of hanging and running into the module. So we're going to mount this higher, whether that be up here behind the radio, which there's normally enough room when you're done to put it here, or even if you're going to mount it underneath, maybe you're going to go up here where the amplifier is. Just make sure you secure it where it's flat and there's not anything going to allow water to run into the box. All right, so from this point, we're going to plug this into the other side of our amp connector. And again, we're going to show you some wire management at the end as to where to put this. It looks like a lot right now because we don't have any speaker pods in place. We don't have a headlight in here, and we haven't really secured this up anywhere. So we're going to push the little button and release this so that these will plug in together. And just that simple. We're actually wired now, and our amp would play, and all of our speakers would be getting signal, with the exception of one more wire, which is just our amp turn-on wire here, that also has a mating plug here on our radio harness. So we'll do some wiring management. We'll zip tie all this up where it goes. We'll show you that here in just a little while, but we're going to move on to our lowers and our speaker pods because we need to get our wiring ran. We need to get these things in place before we start securing the wiring up.